Hey there, and welcome to another TLDR US video. Today is Super Tuesday, which means that 14 US states and 1 territory cast their ballots for the presidential primaries. So in this video, we're going to explain what Super Tuesday is, why it's such an important step in the primary process, and how it might affect the outcome of the 2020 Democratic primaries. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel so that we can update you on the results of Super Tuesday, as well as the primaries and politics more generally. Before we get into Super Tuesday, we thought it might be good to briefly explain the nomination process to give a bit of context as to understand its importance in the course of electing a president. Since the Democratic primary is currently going on, and the Republican process has already decided with President Trump running as an incumbent and no serious challenge to him, we'll stick to explaining the Democratic Party rules. If you'd like us to do a video on the Republican Party process and the differences between the Republican and Democratic Party primaries, then let us know in the comments. Both presidential parties have their national conventions around late July, early August, during presidential years. At that convention, delegates vote for the party's nominee. These delegates are chosen in the primary process. In 2020, there are 3,979 delegates up for grabs in the Democratic nomination. This means that in order to get the nomination, a candidate needs a majority of 1,990. However, there's another important variable that's unique to the Democratic primary. Superdelegates are current and former government or party officials who each have a vote at the convention. Unlike pledged delegates, however, superdelegates are not bound by any democratic process and are free to vote for whoever they like. This caused a big uproar in 2016, as Clinton secured 572 superdelegates compared to only 42 for Senator Sanders, leading some to argue that the nomination should be decided by pledged delegates alone. As a result, in 2020, the Democratic National Committee changed the rules of the convention to disallow superdelegates from voting in the first ballot. Anyway, as the primaries happen, delegates are awarded to candidates based on their vote share within a particular state, and state law determines how these delegates are awarded to candidates if they've reached the 15% viability threshold. So, enough of that. Let's get to Super Tuesday. As the name might suggest, Super Tuesday is the most important single day in the presidential nominating process, because more delegates are decided on this one day than any other in the primary calendar. Super Tuesday hasn't always been in existence. It wasn't until the 1980s that it became a mighty force in the primary process. In fact, in 1984, there were 3 Super Tuesdays in the Democratic primaries that year. After the chaotic 1968 Democratic National Convention, where Hubert Humphrey secured the nomination without competing in any primaries, states began competing with each other to try and get the most influence in the process. There are 2 reasons for this competition. Firstly, state law in Iowa and New Hampshire requires that they be the first caucus and primary in the nation, a position which has been heavily criticised, partly because of the disappointing reporting of results in Iowa, and partly because both states lack diversity. The second reason for the competition is oftentimes nominees are decided before some states get the chance to vote, thus giving early states like Iowa and New Hampshire a much bigger say in who the party's nominee will be. Let's take a look at a couple of examples where this has been the case. In the 2016 Republican primaries, 12 candidates competed in Iowa on February 1st, but that number was cut down to 5 by Super Tuesday of that year. By April, the number was 3, and Donald Trump became the presumptive nominee on May 3rd, after winning the Indiana primary, as he was the only candidate left after Ted Cruz and John Kasich suspended their campaigns. But at this point, there were still 9 contests left, including California, which has the largest delegate count of any state. And this isn't unique to either political party. In the 2004 Democratic primary, then Massachusetts Senator John Kerry secured the nomination on March 11th, 4.5 months before the convention, with 9 contests taking place in the interim. As you can see, the earlier a state votes, the more influence it has in choosing the nominee, because it helps the candidates gain momentum. However, it's worth saying this isn't always the case. In both the contest between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in 2008, and that of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in 2016, the nomination was not secured by any candidate until June. Of course, it is possible that in 2008 and 2016, there was such a packed field of candidates that the party simply wasn't able to coalesce around a single nominee. Regardless, though, it's very clear that Super Tuesday is an important day in the process, and today is no exception. We're not going to make a prediction about what's going to happen, as there are several possibilities that could arise from these contests. With Sanders' popular vote win in Iowa, along with wins in New Hampshire and Nevada, Buttigieg's delegate win in Iowa, Joe Biden's win in South Carolina, and no one candidate thus far able to coalesce the party behind them, it's very likely that Super Tuesday will have a huge impact, particularly for the former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, who's actually competing for the first time. He was a late entrant into the race and forewent the early state contests, instead concentrating a ton of money and advertising on the Super Tuesday states. If you'd like to know more about Bloomberg, check out our video on his rise in the primary. The context will be useful for seeing his effect on Super Tuesday. There's a link to that video down below. Anyway, if the results from today's votes aren't decisive enough, and too many candidates secure enough delegates to warrant remaining in the race, it could lead to a contested convention. This means that no candidate will get a majority and secure the nomination in the first ballot. In that scenario, pledged delegates are released and are free to vote for whomever they wish. Also, remember those superdelegates we touched on earlier? Well, this would mean that they would also be allowed to vote, and as we mentioned earlier, they're not bound to any particular candidate. So it's unclear what would happen if no candidate secures the nomination prior to the convention. But it's also worth pointing out that contested conventions in modern US politics are extremely rare. In fact, the last contested conventions were in 1952, when neither party had a candidate before the convention. But despite its rarity, as we pointed out before, politics is not a game of certainty, and there's no telling what will happen. We'll keep you up to date on the results of today's election in the coming days, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we post a new video. Special thanks to our supporters on Patreon who make these videos possible.